Let's officially get started. Today's free webinar is brought to you by Lysol Pro Solutions, Adaptive Cleaning, a systematic approach for facility managers in the hybrid workplace. And Dave Frank is our expert today. He's going to speak to us on this topic. Dave is the president of the American Institute for Cleaning Sciences on behalf of Lysol Pro Solutions. I do want to mention that at the end of the presentation that Dave is going to handle, we are going to welcome Brian Leafblad. He's the R&D Senior Manager, Global Business Solutions at Reckitt. He's going to join us to answer questions specific to his expertise as well. So during the Q&A, you'll have two experts to ask questions of. So welcome, everyone. Looks like we're ready to get started. Dave, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Jeff. Thank you very much.
It's all yours.
Thank you. Today's topic is going to be on what's happening in the commercial building market. And we've been watching this now for well over a year. We were concerned coming out of COVID that a lot of people were working remotely. They had their monitors, their cameras. Corporations were trying to maneuver through that. I'm not here to give investment advice. I'm not here to talk about what's going to happen to commercial buildings. What we're really here to do is to talk about how the commercial cleaning industry will need to respond to some of the customers. And we're going to use standards and protocols and the best practices that we have available to us to talk about how to respond, how to have the conversations. And many of the roads will lead to a conversation about money. Cleaning is anywhere from 20 to 25% of the total maintenance and operations cost of most commercial buildings. And so it's not a small number. Obviously, coming out of COVID, there's a lot of building occupants that are looking for health, wellness, safety in the workplace. And so a lot of the habits, a lot of people's opinions haven't really changed. But the challenge for the property management community is, what do I do with all this empty space? And I know that a lot of corporations have said, hey, we're bringing our people back to work. I mean, every week there's an article on this subject matter. The issue is that it's all being done differently. And I talk to a lot of 30-year-olds, and I talk to a lot of young people about what their companies, what their corporations are doing, and it's all different. But the protocols, the standards, and how we approach this will primarily give us a roadmap or a blueprint as to how we approach this as business professionals. So when we talk about adaptive cleaning, there's a lot of different systems that are available, but when we look at the best practices, it's going to all come down to the money piece. And then how are these property managers configuring their buildings? How are we deploying the workforce? Right now, we have a greater level of absenteeism amongst the workforce than I've ever seen before. Everyone is short on labor. The supervisors and the managers are on deck. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to staff some of these buildings. And so when we talk about occupancy, we're going to talk also about vacancy and the actual usage so that we know how to have a conversation with a customer about the subject matter. But the workforce shortages, I'm seeing it in there's probably about 15 different verticals within the commercial cleaning industry and sub-verticals. And we're seeing it everywhere, whether it's a hospital or a hotel. And it's having an effect on our business and the consumption of different types of items. And so facility managers are going to have questions. I want to make sure that everybody on this call has answers. So we're talking about the business of cleaning and how we actually get to what they're asking us to do, depending on how it's affecting their budgets or how they're trying to approach it. I had a conversation yesterday with an executive at Lysol, and I said, flu season is coming. And I'm not fear-mongering here. Flu season is coming. It's just around the corner. And last year, at about this time, I made the same statement to some friends of mine in the business. And everybody just kind of ignored it. Then all of a sudden, there was a shortage of test kits, Everybody was getting the flu around Thanksgiving, people were traveling, then it extended into Christmas and into New Year's, and there seemed to be a shortage of the things that people were looking for. So my advice to all the facility professionals, the stakeholders, and the stockholders that are on this call is that you need to be prepared. And I'm not saying that you need to go out and buy $1 million worth of stuff. What I am saying is that you need to have some type of emergency preparedness if there's an outbreak in your building, because people in the building are going to be looking for those basic types of items like wipes, disinfectants. They're going to be looking for the things that they were accustomed to using when COVID was at its peak. And so again, things have changed. The public's perception of what we do as an industry is what changed. And so it's a good idea to make sure that you have a meeting with the people in your facility prior to flu season to make sure that you're prepared with the right protocols, the right cleaning products, the right safety types of products, and that you have the right brands to make sure that you're sending that message to the occupants of the building. So overview, content. We're going to talk about the hybrid workplace and all the different models that are out there. And everyone has a different definition. It's just a matter of knowing what the vocabulary is. I think the key thing when you're talking to property managers about this subject matter is that you ask a lot of questions, you take notes, and that you take the content from this deck and share those ideas with them. Because this is having a major impact on the property management market. I can't change that. We deliver the news, we don't invent it. And so what's happening is and I see this when I'm in commercial buildings. I look to the left, that area is empty. I look to the right, that area is empty. I go up to the 5th floor and I'm seeing empty spaces. And so whatever it is, this has had not only a significant impact, always follow the money. It's having an impact on the actual revenue of some of these organizations. Some cities are different. Some businesses are different. Again, you're going to have to assess the types of buildings that you're working with and check in with the managers to say, look, I have some ideas. I have some ways in which I believe we can help so that you can create not only customer loyalty, but to have a true partnership with that customer. The question is how do I adapt and how do we design a cleaning system that works in this new environment? And this is relatively new. This is the first time anyone in the commercial cleaning space has actually talked about these protocols in a session like this. At the bottom of the banner, at the bottom of this presentation are the citations. This organization provides a lot of different types of services to the commercial building market. When they first started to report on this, I sent this out to a lot of the stakeholders in the industry and said, look at this website, look at what these guys are producing. So about every week or every 2 weeks, they send us out this report. And again, what we're looking for is the data, and the data fluctuates. And so right now, when you take 10 of the major cities across the country, the occupancy of these buildings is only at 47%. Somebody said, well, it'd be nice if it was 75. I said, it'd be nice if it was 60. But whatever it is, it affects what we do. It affects the companies that sell paper products, hand soap. It affects the contract cleaning companies that are on this call, because having empty buildings is not good for our business. And we've always been an industry that's been recession resistant. We've never dealt with anything like this. This is an unintended consequence that evolved out of COVID. And so now the question is what information do we need? What are our best practices? And what is the conversation going to sound like? You're welcome to go onto their website. You can certainly subscribe, and then you'll receive this screen image. This is the most recent one that I received this morning, showing what's happening with the occupancy of these major buildings. Okay, let's talk about our business, because it's the business of cleaning. When we talk about the business of cleaning, there are 4 primary pillars that building owners, building managers are looking for. People want a clean, safe, healthy building at the right cost. During COVID, the cost of cleaning was in a runaway mode, and it had an effect on a lot of budgets. There was a lot of CARES Act money. I get all that. But now people are looking for zero-based budgeting, trying to figure out how to get a building clean at the right price. My question, and one of the most important questions that I ask when I'm in these meetings is I always ask people what their tolerance for dirt is. Dirty buildings don't generate revenue. There's a cost associated with visitors, occupants, people not wanting to be in a building because they don't feel that it's clean or safe. So when you look at these 4 pillars from an administrative perspective, if one of them is being questioned, the other 3 are being questioned. And so this operates as a North Star for what we do. You can talk about products, you can talk about floor machines, you can talk about shiny floors, but that's really talking to customers about how we build a watch. What we're looking for is we're looking for outcomes, and we're looking to stay focused on the business of cleaning because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So when we looked at all the models and we talked to all the people, everybody started talking about the hybrid workplace. They would talk about remote work. They would talk about the environmental impact of not having to drive to work and drive back and commuting. So these are all the basic words that came out of the white papers, and there were many of them regarding remote work models. So as I talked with a lot of young people, my kids are in their 30s, I found out that there were different models. Some people didn't have a corporation close to them where they were fully remote. Other workers were having defined days in the office where somebody was coming in 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and for, let's say, strategic meetings or team meetings. We're also seeing some corporations looking at a 4-day work week. But whatever it is, it's not going back to the way it was before. Everyone is looking at talent. They're looking at the cost structure. Obviously, a corporation that can establish a, let's say, hybrid workplace where it works for everybody certainly could lower their cost and create a competitive advantage within their organization. Also, the issue around employee retention, I think, is very important, and having happy workers. And so we look at it and we see these different models. We have to be prepared to understand what the models are and what's going on within the organization. You have to have a dialogue with your customer, and that will lead you to having a greater understanding of what it is that they're asking for. In the original paper that we did on the value of cleaning several years ago, we, in our research, discovered that the federal government tracks commercial building data. And so in this, you're looking at the primary verticals and sub-verticals, and there are certain trends that we see from one report to another. And so when we look at it right now, of the 97 billion square feet, 17% of that is office space. This office space is 50% occupied. So does it represent an issue? I think it does. It represents a big issue. Manufacturing, I can't work from home. Obviously, hospitality, education, lodging, there are certain things where it's not conducive, but the office space represents a big chunk of the total square footage within all the buildings that are available. If you want to access the image that this report came off of, it's a website called EIA.gov. And what they do is they look at energy consumption, like lighting and HVAC, but they also track the total square footage of each vertical. So it's a great resource when you're talking about this subject, because at least it isolates it and it tells us more about potentially where the changes occurred. For the contract cleaners that are on this call, and I've worked with many of you, the contract cleaners started to diversify their business into manufacturing, healthcare. Some people started to look at lodging. They looked at outsourcing K through 12 or higher education. Whatever it is, some organizations were very proactive in moving their book of business to a vertical that may have had more potential or a greater demand for their services. So in the commercial building space, we have single tenant and multi-tenant buildings. A single tenant building is going to be a building like State Farm. It's an insurance company. They're the only tenant in the building. And when we see this, usually it's a single influencer. They're looking at their costs. Obviously, they have a captive tenant. It's their employees. And so there's a variety of different options that you can have in a single tenant building. If someone says, look, we're moving it from night cleaning to day cleaning, it'll be easier in a single tenant building. In a multi-tenant building, it's going to be more difficult to make changes. You're going to have, let's say, attorneys, a dentist's office, a doctor's office, could be a variety of different types of tenants. But whatever it is, to make change in a multi-tenant building is going to require a lot of work on the part of the property manager. It's going to require over communication if we make any kind of change to the scope of work, the number of days that the facility is being cleaned, cleaning schedules. I've seen this before. It also has a lot to do with bus routes and getting workers to the job site. Change is not easy, especially in our industry, because there's a lot of moving pieces. Most people don't understand all the variables involved in a cleaning operation. So those two issues are important so that you know what's easy to do versus what's more complicated. Vacancy versus occupancy is covered by some of the folks at BOMA and IFMA. And so here's my take on this issue, is that if I have a third floor of a building and there's 10 people on the third floor, instead of 100 people on the third floor, it doesn't matter. If the building is not occupied, but there are 10 people still on that floor, they're using the bathroom, they're using the break room, they might be using the cafeteria, so I still have to clean all of that area regardless of whether it's 10 or whether it's 100. And most of the contractors on this call are not going to reduce the cost of cleaning in that specific case. Vacancy is different. And so many of the contractors here are used to issuing vacancy credits when an area is vacant. And so that represents a cost savings. It also represents the ability to readjust the staffing levels. And I have to have information to do this. So here's what I would do. If I was a property manager and I had a 500,000 square foot building, and let's say that half of it was empty. Let's just stick with the numbers that we have. I would pay for the cost of moving the building occupants into 250,000 square feet. And then I would ask for a vacancy credit for the other 250,000 square feet because it's vacant. There's no one there. No one's making messes. It doesn't require cleaning or stocking toilet tissue. It may have, a baseline where you need to make sure that it's dusted and it's clean for when you're doing showings for potential new customers. But you're seeing a push down that's occurred. And I've seen push down in other industries where the Class A office buildings are saying to Class B tenants, hey, we'll give you a Class A office building experience for a Class B price. And so there's a lot of positioning. We also see buildings being remodeled to be a multi-use building where they're putting in restaurants, health clubs, condos, extended stay facilities, and apartments. And so I've seen that in some different areas here in Denver, but you take a risk when you spend millions of dollars to retool one of these large buildings. Vacancy and occupancy are different. And like I said, if I was a property manager, I would be looking to drive cost out of the system as rapidly as possible, because if I don't have the revenue base that I need, I have to find a way to cut costs. And so obviously, if cleaning is 25, 30% of the total maintenance and operations budget, that certainly represents a sizable number. But you have to have a conversation about the difference between occupancy and vacancy, and then what ideas you have to help them. Maybe they can't move all the tenants into 250,000 square feet, but whatever it is, I'm looking for some type of conversation around ideas and ways in which we can drive cost out of the system and deliver clean, safe, healthy buildings. So I know this image is a pretty easy image to understand, but when I look at the traffic, and I live in Denver, when I look at the traffic, Mondays and Fridays, the traffic is lighter. And what we're seeing is we're seeing Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are the days when people are in the office. Fridays are an absolute ghost town. Monday has a high level of vacancy also. And then the contractors are doing project and tag work on off days. But this has an impact on the building, and it also has an impact on the community. If you look at these urban environments where these large buildings are, there's a donut effect, and there's actually a white paper talking about the donut effect. That donut effect is affecting small businesses in the community, the dry cleaners, the restaurants, the sub sandwich place, everything around that environment is being impacted by the lack of occupants in that area. And so some organizations are looking at a 4-day work week where they're going to get their 40 hours in 4 days, and then people are going to potentially have a 3-day weekend. But the occupancy level changes from day to day, and the contractors that are dealing with this, you see it. Go back to occupancy versus vacancy, and you'll have a clearer conversation with that customer about what can be done. So let's talk about and let's look at what's happening in the labor market. The commercial cleaning industry is one of the top 5 service sectors globally. And so when we look at the actual labor market, we have some options. And people say, I can't get people to work at night. I understand. I used to do work at night. I grew up in this business, and I've been doing this for over 40 years. And when we talk about labor, it is nighttime cleaning, in my opinion, takes people away from their families. It creates a social issue. It's a part-time job for a lot of people, and I get it. But the issue is that for some of you on this call, and for some of the advocates for day cleaning, and I'm not advocating that you should do this, but I do have to have a conversation about options. And so there is a workforce that cleans during the day. And I mostly see it around people who clean houses, right? They drop their children off at school at 8 o'clock in the morning. They work from 8:30 until 2:30, and then they pick up their children at school, and the whole thing can be seamless. And so a lot of people say, well, I don't want to do cleaning during the day. I understand. The issue is it represents an option for a different labor pool. The McDonald's in my community is paying between $18 and $20 an hour. And so is everybody else, because they're trying to attract workers, especially when you're operating a business where you need to have a labor pool. Deferred activity cleaning is defined by some different school districts that I worked with. They talked about deferred activity maintenance. Well, now they're taking a look at the altered scope of work. We're performing a risk assessment. I'll give you the citation that comes from that, where I may have to start skip cleaning. If I have to drive cost out of the system, I have to know my numbers. I have to understand my tasks, frequencies, and area types, and I may have to alter the scope of work. Again, the conversation is what's your tolerance for dirt if I have to drive cost out of the issue, out of the operation. Collaborative cleaning was trying to get building occupants to make less messes, to reduce the cost of cleaning by reducing the activity, things that are being performed. We've seen it in universities. I've seen it in schools where, again, people are trying to say, hey, we don't have the people, we need help. We need people to not only make less messes, but in some cases, collaborative cleaning in single tenant buildings had occupants, taking their trash out to a centralized aisle where they had tandem brutes and they dumped their own trash. I've also seen and evaluated robotics, and I think that certain buildings are better suited for robotics than others. So it really depends on your square footage, whether it's carpeting or tile, but there's a variety of different robots that I've seen in the field. Obviously, they can be anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000, depending on the manufacturer. They're also highly technical, but I know that a lot of customers are reaching out to the robotics companies because they can't get a reliable workforce to come to work every day, and they're looking for a way to complete those tasks. So for those of you who've done day cleaning, you know what the ins and outs are. In working with some different folks over the years on this subject that made these transformations, whether it was General Motors or State Farm, one, it was most successful in a single tenant building. I didn't need to get consensus. In some cases, they reduced labor by 5 to 10%. This was done by eliminating day porters and moving the entire cleaning operations to days. There was a reduction in complaints because the cleaning workers become part of the working community, and there's a relationship that the building occupants have versus having workers just come in at night. There can be a reduced employee turnover. Turnover is not a profit center. It causes errors, it causes complaints. It can also cause contractors to lose contracts. For some people that had security issues, day cleaning eliminates a lot of issues related to security or anything that might be related to pilferage in a building. For some people, there was a potential energy savings because they were able to shut the lights off at 5 o'clock in that commercial building, and that provided some energy savings. There were some calculators that were built over the years to be able to do that. And so these are some of the benefits from it. I think the biggest benefit is reaching out to a different labor force. And reaching out to a labor force that works for you, again, is not easy to do. I'm not going to present it as being easy. It does represent a certain level of change. Day porter consolidation, and one of the customers that I interacted with, $60,000 a year in savings. There was energy savings. This depends on the lights. Usually there's a light fixture for every 50 square feet in a commercial building. Depending on the BTU consumption, it's all different by state. That could represent anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, depending on the lighting of the building. And then the collaborative cleaning piece in this specific site represented another savings where they were looking at what we call cubicle farms in large call centers where they were getting building occupants to dump their own trash. And in that case, that was about a $50,000 or $60,000 a year savings. Now, not all buildings are going to get these savings, but when you start to drill down on the costs, then you can identify if there's a compelling reason to change something as it relates to when the building is clean and how that is cleaned. This is a slide that comes out of some day cleaning decks, and we're not here to promote day cleaning. We're here to talk about the option if you're having a difficult time getting labor. And so again, part-time jobs in the morning, part-time jobs in the afternoon, right? Semi-retired, stay-at-home moms and dads, people that don't want to work at night. This represents a much larger block and can be an opportunity for a lot of people within the commercial cleaning business. If you have an Amazon warehouse close, or you have a lot of restaurants close, we're going to be at this $18, $20 an hour mark. We have to be able to compete. And I realize that there is turnover. I realize that in some cases it can be an unskilled labor pool. But the issue is people say, well, it's not my fault. I said, no, it's not. I said, but it is our responsibility. And so the responsibility is that buildings need to be cleaned, and we need to be able to figure out as an industry how we're going to do that. Now, when we talk about cleaning, a lot of people want to use scientific equipment to measure clean. I don't. I do not want to measure the angels dancing on the head of a pin. I've seen organizations spend millions of dollars trying to do this scientifically. The industry's best practice is to be able to perform inspections. And I'm performing the inspection, and I'll tie it together against the scope of work. And so if it's a government contract, it may not have a scope of work, it may be performance-based. But 90% of most buildings in America are scoped, where I have defined tasks and frequencies. Then we can put a weighting system in the inspection software. We can certainly perform a risk assessment of area types if we need to drive cost out of the system. Then what we're looking at is pass-fail. And then what is the plan for corrective action? And so, look, when it comes to cleaning, we all miss stuff. There are customers that see stuff. That's not the question. The question is how do we communicate? How do we manage it? Do we have a comprehensive inspection program in place? And then do we have a methodology to perform corrective action and make sure that we're over communicating with the customer? No news is not good news. No news is bad news. And so inspection systems, and many of you are using them, certainly this is helpful to be able to focus on the number and what they're paying for versus just having a conversation without data. Of all the standards that we've published in the industry, by far, this is one of the most important documents. If you don't have one of these, you don't have anything to talk about. When you're looking at a building, and I just did this for a college here in Colorado. When you establish the area types and you start talking about what you do daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, you now have a roadmap for the conversation about the cost of cleaning and what they want done. When you don't have a scope of work, and I know this requires effort on someone's part, then you're having a conversation about nothing. And if it isn't in writing, it isn't worth talking about. And so these documents are invaluable, and it should be part of everyone's contract, in my opinion. The other thing that we've done over the years is we have a complete set of non-cleaning tasks, because a lot of custodial operations are providing concierge services for certain types of buildings. And so those should be documented in addition to what's happening with the actual cleaning applications. If I need to cut the budget, if I want to increase cleanliness, I'm going to look to the scope of work to determine area types, tasks, and cleaning frequencies. This also represents your baseline cost structure. And so I can't emphasize it enough. If you have these, great. If you don't, someone needs to take the time in the operation to get all this in writing. Sooner or later, the cost of cleaning is going to come up and people are going to ask questions. So let's talk briefly about the job costing piece. This is a slide that I've been showing for years in educational programs. And a lot of the contract cleaners will ask me for a copy of it, because what's below the waterline is what they outsource. And so when you start to look at the business of cleaning, you're looking at the cost of insurance, hiring, firing, account retention. Turning over accounts every 18 months is not a profit center. And so when I look at our business, it's not the business that we're in, it's the way that we're in business. And a lot of people will disagree with some of those things, but the fundamental issue with is that there's a cost structure to everything that we do. The labor and the products is pretty easy to see. Capital expenditures and their life cycles, workers' compensation, regulatory compliance. I was looking at a document one time, and this contractor had a $140,000 OSHA fine, second violation, willful violation. right, on bloodborne pathogens. Obviously, had never cleaned healthcare facilities before, but there's dollar amounts that come in on each of these individual bullets. Production rates, human resources, product complexity. When I talk to suppliers, they want to sell more stuff. I get it. When I talk to customers, they want simplification. They want products that are intuitive. They want products that have certain performance characteristics. Quality assurance. Are we measuring ourselves and are we communicating with the customer about what those goals and objectives are? All of this represents a cost structure, and the hidden costs are the ones that are more difficult for some people to get their hands around than others. When you look at the budgets, it is not 90-10. It has never been 90-10. It's not 90% labor, 10% product. There's direct labor, there's supervision, there's administrative costs, and then there's the cost of actual products and supplies. I'm going to make this statement, and I've made it before. Cheap cleaning supplies increases the cost of cleaning. I'm going to say that again. Cheap cleaning supplies, cheap equipment, cheap, has a higher cost of cleaning. It impacts the overall cost of the organization. When I look at our business, you've got to have a balance of quality products, the right types of brands. You've got to make sure that workers are trained and understand what it is that's expected of them. And so when you start to dig around in the budgets, what you see is the actual numbers related to what we do and how we do it and what the actual structure is. So workloading. I don't do longhand workloading. I refuse. And the reason that I don't is because no one has all the data. They don't have the building square footage. They don't know their scopes. They don't have their area types defined. They don't know their production rates. And we're going to talk about that in a second. And they don't know their frequencies. So it makes it very difficult to plug all this into a computer system if I don't have the information. Shorthand workloading allows us to take a 100,000 square foot building. The trash and vacuuming might be at 5,000 square feet per hour with some other tasks. Restrooms are usually separated at 3 minutes a fixture. Then I'm trying to figure out my hours per night. There's a lot of people on this call who know the business well enough to do shorthand workloading and at least have a conversation about the number as to where we are. And so there's lots of different ways to determine this, but that's a separate course. So when I look at production rates, they usually break out this way. If I walk up to a custodian and say, how long does it take to clean a classroom? They usually respond by saying, who wants to know? If you ask somebody what the production rate is, they're like, I don't know. But if you say, how long does it take you to perform a specific task, they can usually give you a better idea of how long something takes. So I can walk through a building and count trash cans and give it a 30 to 60 seconds per can. I can say that trash is at 20,000 square feet per hour. I can also take restrooms, and restrooms are best workloaded by the minute. Toilet, sink, and urinal is a fixture. If there's 10 of them, it takes 3 minutes or 30 minutes to perform, let's say, a 15-step standard operating procedure for cleaning restrooms. The holy grail in our industry is how much square footage can a worker clean per hour? I've got a client that does it at 10,000 square feet per hour. They're skip cleaning the building. I have some clients that are at 2,500 square feet per hour. It depends on the scope. It depends on how mechanized the organization is. And it depends on a bunch of other variables. But these are the types of production rates that people look for. I've structured time studies. The most important thing is not verifying a cleaning time, but it's defining the actual protocol as to how you came up with the time and can you replicate that protocol. So in each time study that we've done, we put the protocol and the transparency in place so that any vacuum cleaner company can determine the time by using that protocol. So that this way it can be replicated. And I think that's the most important thing. But again, talking about workloading and this topic is a separate course. Many of you are using team cleaning, or you're using some form of specialist. There are production rates with the vacuum specialist and the trash specialist. Obviously, our industry loves restroom specialists because the quality level is higher. And then a lot of the working supervisors are classified as utility specialists. When you're looking at cost calculations, you're going to see task time and frequency, which is traditional workloading. You may have dedicated coverage with a day porter or somebody who's in an operating theater where they're in a healthcare facility and they're dedicated for that 7 hours. We have supervision costs, and then we may have floor techs, carpet techs, or window washing specialists all become part of the actual cost calculation when you're trying to build out a budget. Now, this topic comes up, and it's a topic that requires some verification, and it also requires an understanding of risk. When people ask me, how do we drive cost out of the system? I have to perform a risk assessment. Now, CDC finally put together something giving it high, moderate, and low risk. Restrooms, break rooms, cafeterias are all classified as high risk. And so before we do anything, a risk assessment is an important conversation if your customer wants to drive cost out of the system or if they want to change their actual cleaning frequencies. There is a link at the bottom which shows where this information came from. A risk assessment is important when you're talking about cleanliness, hygiene, sanitation, and obviously each building is going to be different. So the implementation plan is not overly complicated. One, I have to have a conversation with the customer. Two, I have to figure out what their goals and objectives are and gather all the building data and get the customer to define their goals and objectives. You may want to assemble 2 or 3 different options, given what their objectives are and what their financial goals may be. Then when the customer says, yes, we like that idea, the next question is how are you going to get your operations team to set up staffing plans, scopes of work, the actual scheduling? Number 4 is going to be the most difficult part of the change that you make. Then I need to communicate with all stakeholders. You're going to have to implement and measure all these changes, and it's going to be tough for the first couple of weeks. And it's more than likely that you're going to have to make some adjustments, and the customer is going to need to understand that for those first couple of weeks when you're making these changes, that it's going to be difficult. Someone's going to miss a trash can. Something's going to happen in the building, and they need to be patient as long as you're working together towards a common goal. When I look at standard operating procedures, and somebody said to me, who wrote those? I said, I did. There's an incredible amount of granular detail that goes into a standard operating procedure. And I realize that not everybody wants to follow those procedures, but during COVID, a lot of our user customers were very dependent on having that structure to demonstrate to whether it was the health department that they had the structure in place. So when we look at it, not only do I need products that perform, I need outcomes and results. I need clean, safe, healthy buildings at the right cost. And I need to come up with the balance, and I need the systems put into place to make sure that I get the outcome that the building property manager or the stakeholders of that building are looking for. So within the resources that we have available to you, there is an implementation guidebook. And that has a lot of information on the different systems. It gives some step-by-step directions on how to deploy an adaptive cleaning system. There are over 40 SOPs. These are step-by-step procedures that are very granular. They're pretty much set up in an ISO 9000 format, but they do give clarity to the work that you're doing. This is not a job card. This is not a job description. It is not a schedule. This is how to clean a bathroom step by step, how to strip a floor step by step, how to clean highly touched objects step by step. The last piece, which I emphasize the importance of, is the actual scope of work. There is a template in Excel that gives a baseline for you to take a look at so that you can build your own scope of work. This can be useful for an RFP, it's useful for budgeting, and it is probably the single most important document that you can have to have a conversation about the business of cleaning. Okay, I think we're pretty much running on time. Question and answer session. Jeff, are you there?
I am here, Dave. You've been doing this a while, haven't you?
I think so.
So
we have a good time though. That's the big part.
I enjoyed this and our attendees as well. And Brian, welcome to being on camera with us. Brian, as I mentioned, is the R&D Senior Manager of Global Business Solutions at Reckitt. So we have a few questions. I do want to say that if we can't get to every question, that there will be follow-up. So the Reckitt team will be able to get with folks afterwards, or Dave as well. So are you two ready for this?
Ready?
Yep, fire away.
We have several questions. Here's the first one. Does it really matter which product I'm using when it comes to labor efficiency? And you two can talk about that.
Well, if you're using the wrong product, then the worker's going, well, whatever, if you're using the wrong product and the wrong application, you're not going to get the job done. And then it's going to create a complaint and corrective action. Potentially, it could frustrate a frontline worker. So my answer is that products matter. As long as you understand, there's a big difference between cleaning like a health club and what chemicals are used there. There's a difference in an industrial facility or manufacturing facility. And if you look at the soil conditions of those restrooms versus what you might see in a hospital or in a university, there are different soil conditions that may require a change in the performance characteristics of the product. Same thing goes for equipment. There's a lot of equipment that you can buy that's disposable. I really look for equipment that has a high performance characteristic and a longer life cycle with a higher level of a higher production rate in addition to that.
Brian, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And let me give you a few examples of some specific things or times when these do really matter that ties back to performance and efficiency. One in particular is related to disinfection and germ kill. So the first thing is make sure you know what the contact time is for any disinfectant product you're using. Some people will call it the kill time, the dwell time. Basically, it's the amount of time that the surface has to stay wet in order for that disinfectant to do its job and actually kill the germs. And sometimes you will see different contact times for the same product. So your product may say it's a 10-minute disinfectant for general disinfection, and it may be 5 minutes for a specific organism. So to Dave's point about the different customer types and the different industries, if you know which industry you're servicing, what type of customer you're cleaning, therefore which germs they care about, which bacteria, which viruses are going to be most important, make sure that matches with the particular disinfectant product that you're using, so that you're using the right dilution ratio and the right contact time. The other one I'll mention is more on the cleaning side of things. And it's a real practical example about making sure you're using the right product for the type of surface and soil that you're trying to clean. One thing that we see a lot that happens is people will go in with the best of intentions. They have their product, their program, everything set up, and then something goes wrong. Either they run out of a chemical, or somebody forgets to bring it with, or something happens, and so they're on the spot trying to problem solve and do something. And so if somebody, for example, you're running an auto scrubber through a large facility, you have a large footprint, and you need volume, you need productivity. What happens if you run out of your floor cleaner? Then what do you do? Right? So people just, I got to get this floor clean, and so they say, well, I'm going to use my APC, my all-purpose cleaner, and dilute that out, or I'm going to grab some dish soap because soap is soap. If you put the wrong product into the wrong purpose, Like those two examples I gave, they're going to fill your auto scrubber with foam. And then your productivity goes down because you have to empty it. So products are designed for particular soil types, particular surfaces, and particular industries. So make sure you're using the right one.
Good.
Jeff, I've got a couple of questions here in the Q&A box. Do you mind if I answer these?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so question number one is any information on gyms and yoga centers? It doesn't matter what the type of building that you have, the scope of work applies. And I go to a couple of different health clubs. One is really dirty and one is not. And so again, the question is do they have the time and the structure and the people that understand how to get that facility clean? But there is some specific information on gyms and what they clean. Obviously, that's one where germ transmission is easy to occur just because people are sweating on equipment and everybody's grabbing the dumbbells. The next question I see is from Gavin. Do you see a difference in the cleaning frequency of commercial buildings as it relates to a union? Cleaning frequencies, cleaning is not a race. Cleaning is about coming up with an outcome. So whether it's union or non-union, I think the union has to agree to the scope of work and the tasks that are being performed. If I'm putting in mechanization or battery-powered backpacks, whatever it might be, my feeling is that you have to work together with the union to come up with something that works for everybody. So there's a question here, and I may send this over to Brian. It was talking about gym mats.
Mm-hmm.
This is from Sylvia again. And so did you want to answer that, Brian?
Yeah, so gym mats can be a little tricky. So I can't really give you a specific product or even necessarily a specific product type that universally is going to be good for gym mats. But a couple of things to take a look at. One is going to be it's more about the cleaning process and less about the specific product. All right. If you have to clean that gym mat using a mop and bucket, that is going to tend to leave behind more chemical residue from the mop water on the floor, which will tend to get a little sticky, which will tend to attract the chalk for the chalking issue that she was mentioning. So the first thing I would do is try to minimize the amount of liquid that is applied to the mat and that's left on the mat, particularly afterwards.
Okay.
All right.
Jeff, have you got any other questions that you're seeing?
We have a few more to consider. This one is, does surface disinfection really matter when we're talking about scoping of work? So
Surface
who wants to start?
Surface disinfection always matters. The scope of work is really designed so that you know what is the area type, what tasks are you performing. Now, in the scope of work, you can certainly detail the types of products that you want to use, whether it's a Lysol disinfectant or whether it's a microfiber cloth. You can color code that. You can give granular detail to your scope of work, but there's the scope of work is just giving the roadmap as to what you're doing so that you can have a business conversation about the frequency of the tasks, especially if somebody starts talking about money.
Brian?
Yeah, I would say it more of the disinfectant, the surface disinfectants tend to apply more directly to your specific SOPs and the training you provide to your people for how to actually clean the space. Once you land the account, you have the contract, how do you actually do it? And if I go back again to that contact time, that dwell time, if, for example, you're using a 5-minute or a 10-minute contact time disinfectant, are your people really going to stand around and wait for 5 or 10 minutes to then wipe off the surface? No, I mean, nobody does, right? Nobody will, or at least maybe they'll go in with the best of intentions and they think they are. But if you stand there with a watch and time them, it's probably more on the order of a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes, something like that. So as you think about the workflow of how you go about cleaning that space, you can stagger the process so that you inherently build in the correct contact time without having to waste time by people standing around waiting. I saw New Jersey Transit do this last year when they were cleaning the buses at night after they were taken out of service for the day. They had two guys and they timed so the first one would go through, apply their disinfectant, then they literally timed it. They were using a 3-minute disinfection product. So they waited 3 minutes. That first guy, he moved to the next bus. He just kept right on going. He wasn't standing around. The second guy waited the 3 minutes. Then he went into the first bus and started to wipe everything down. But by the time the second guy started, all he had to stand there and wait for was the first 3 minutes. Once he started going, both of them were just continuous operation thereafter. So there's, especially if you're in a larger space and you have a multi-person crew, there's ways like that you can stagger the working and you can plan out the workflow so that it minimizes the amount of wasted time while also making sure that you're actually doing the right procedures to get the results that you need.
Brian, that sounds like someone created a plan and followed it. Sounds like training.
They did, yes. And I mean, they were cleaning several hundred buses every night.
Wow.
So it was high volume. They had to get through it and make sure it was done right. And this was in the heat of COVID as well, and people trying to get back to public transportation. So they were very, very sensitive to making sure that they were doing it right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Our next question, how can I work out how frequently different hotspots need to be cleaned? So
Contamination occurs very quickly. The minute that someone touches something or they go into a restroom and comb their hair, contamination has occurred. And so you can certainly give it a frequency, but if someone's touching door handles, someone's touching elevator buttons, all the defined highly touched objects, you can't clean them enough. And so some people are trying to use different devices, but eventually people came back and said, look, germ transmission, especially as it related to COVID, was not on highly touched objects. It was being transferred through respiratory means. And then there's other papers that say that you can transfer germs or that germs live on inanimate objects. Here's the fundamental issue, because I have a customer who has a college that's an APA level 1, which means that the college is as clean as a hospital. And somebody was observing their worker and said, hey, your people are cleaning clean. And she said, how do I respond to that comment? I said, tell them that you're cleaning the invisible. And
I like that.
And that'll end the conversation. And so we have to have sensible answers to people's questions. So my take is there is no prescribed frequency. Obviously, the highly touched objects in a bathroom are I would prefer to have more technical and frequency and best practice than I would worry about what's happening, in the hallway.
Brian, anything to add to that? I like that, cleaning the invisible. That's good.
Right. And it also to be aware of other like outside mitigating factors. I mean, Dave mentioned earlier that flu season's coming, right? When, we know when cold flu season rolls around, the kids are going back to school, people are out and about in the holidays, and then we get shut into buildings for longer periods of time. More people tend to get sick and it gets spread around. So in times like that, where we're aware that something is going on that is likely to make more people sick, that's the time we want to pay extra attention to cleaning these hotspots, like Dave was mentioned. I mean, we've done different studies that show how germs are transferred around buildings and how fast contaminated surfaces become recontaminated after they're clean. And depending on the number of people there, it can happen anywhere in a couple of hours, right? And like Dave said, you can't clean that fast enough. I mean, nobody's going to be able to clean the same surface every 30 to 60 minutes, unless you're in a highly sterile environment like a hospital. You might need to in a surgical suite, but beyond that, it's just not going to happen. So target those high touch points where you have the most people touching them the most frequently, and particularly in highly sensitive situations like when we're in the middle of cold and flu season. Pay a little extra attention to those.
Okay. One more question. We're going to go a couple minutes overtime. So we'll ask forgiveness of our audience for doing this. But the last question is, when staff turnover is so high, how can I keep a handle on training costs? And we know to our attendees, that's an important budget consideration?
Well, here's the thing is that we set up products and systems that are complicated. We have a multicultural, multilingual workforce. And so my take is that the products need to be intuitive. And the systems that you set up need to be safe. And so when I see job-related injuries, when I see turnover, I just don't see the systems set up. The structure is not in place. And then there's a lot of tribal training that goes on, whether I'm in a restaurant or wherever I'm at, I see it all the time. And someone that doesn't know what they're doing is trying to transfer knowledge that someone who's never cleaned professionally before. And so my take is set up products that are simple, set up systems that are simple, buy equipment that's highly intuitive, that gets the job done right the first time.
Okay, Brian, you might get the last word here.
Okay, yeah, I would agree. It's all about the system, because I was talking to a BSC employee a number of months ago, and she was pushing a cleaning cart around the building. This was a day cleaner, day porter, and she had an entire cart full of products. And so I was talking to her about which ones she actually uses, and there was only 3 of them. And there was probably 25, maybe different product containers on this cart, but she only actually used 3. So I asked her why she had all of the rest of them. And she was like, oh, well, different people have brought those in at different times. And, the night guy, he uses this instead, but I like to use this one instead. And so these things tend to grow like that. People will bring a favorite product from home that they like to use, and now they bring it to the workplace, things like that. So as a manager, if you're setting up these systems, like Dave said, keep it as simple as possible. And part of that is on us as manufacturers and suppliers as well, to provide the tools that will enable you to make it that simple. But make sure it's as clear and simple as possible. You can talk about color coding, you can put easier names on products, you can do things like that, and just keep it simple. It has to stay simple, otherwise people will get creative. And the one thing we do not want is people mixing chemicals or switching bottles around, because that's when people get hurt.
And with 25 options, that can be a dangerous thing.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time, folks. Dave, great presentation. Brian, thank you for joining us for the Q&A portion of this. Do want to mention to our attendees that the recording of this will be available in a few days. Everyone who registered, whether they were here or not, will get a link to the recording, and everyone can share it with their teams, their employees, whoever needs to see this. But great content, and congratulations, Lysol, on a nice sponsorship of this webinar.